it's Rhea. Wherever you are and whatever time it is, I hope you are enjoying yourself. So today I wanted to talk about my process on this piece. It's actually my first digital painting. So, I've been doing digital art for a while, but I feel like this drawing or like this illustration is a bit different than any of the ones that I've ever done before. And so I felt like, recording it and keeping track of the process would be something pretty nice to share with you guys. So yeah, I'm just gonna go ahead and jump right into it, starting with why I created it, or the concept and backstory. So it's actually a pretty old idea, or a thumbnail that I've thought of whenever I catch up in sketchbook tours. You'll probably see a thumbnail and a brief sketch of something saying winter blossom, and yeah, it's just this idea of winter going to spring. I'm a very daydreamy person in the sense that I can just picture these otherworldly scenarios that probably wouldn't happen in day-to-day life, but it's something magical, and that's kind of what I wanted to capture when I thought of the phrase winter blossom. This will probably be true for some of my future pieces too, where a lot of people, they usually come up with the title after they create the drawing, but I'm often inspired by words and things like that, languages. So when I initially pictured this scene in my head of this character sort of looking up in the middle of winter, or this transition of winter, but there's still these flowers and stuff, that's kind of how I came up with the concept of winter blossom. And so that phrase only just helped tie more into that, if that explains anything about the concept. So but to catch up on a lot of the stuff that has already been displayed, basically to go through the beginning process and how I start on this piece and how I start on a lot of my pieces is, I start with a thumbnail essentially, and I think if you saw at the beginning, I tried out three different thumbnails. I usually like to try out multiple options just to play around with the composition, and then I go into when I found out which one I liked the most, I took that one and duplicated it into 4. I really like options, and I really like seeing how different things can look, just so that way I'm confident in the selection that I choose. So you saw that I had 4 different versions of different ways to color this, and it was once again just a thumbnail, but trying to get a general idea. And so after that, and oftentimes I'll post it on social media. I know I post on Twitter or Instagram, either in the feed or just as an actual post, and if anyone has any feedback, I'll be oh, okay. But right now there's hardly anyone keeping track of that, so I usually just talk with one of my friends about it. But anyways, past the thumbnail stage, I then go into the sketch. Usually the sketch is an enlarged version of the thumbnail that I end up rendering, and then when I'm satisfied with that basic sketchy line art, I then create another layer underneath and color the entire sketch all on one layer, just to get a general idea of the colors that I might want to use and things like that. And I create a base, a sketch painting, if that makes sense. And now so getting into the actual process of starting on the final, the final line art and drawing, which is what you're seeing now, as I'm rendering the face and everything. So the thing about this drawing, why, and especially why I call it a painting, is because my art is very reliant on line art. That's kind of just what I've always done. I've painted before, but especially when I'm working, so far when I've worked with digital art, I've always used a form of line art with it. And for this one, for some odd reason, I just felt I shouldn't, or I should try to go without line art. And I think it's because recently I've been trying to push on the sides of this box that I'm in of my current, I don't want to say style, but the current way that I draw, so I guess you could say style. I've been kind of pushing on the sides of the box, trying to see how else I can make things different. And one of them is I want to sort of experiment with either like less noticeable line art or like none at all. And because there's a certain look that I want to achieve, and then sometimes I feel like line art doesn't really fit that look. And that was the case with this painting. So I was like, you know what, I'm gonna just go ahead and try this without line art. And that was very bold of me to do for not only like one of my first, basically my first huge illustration this year, for me to just go like, oh, I'll just not do any line art and just see how it goes and suffer. And I did. So I guess if we want to get into like the challenges and solutions, one of them would definitely be not having line art. And basically how I did that is, you can see at the beginning that I started with line art, like I line arted the character, but later on when I get to rendering the face and things like that, I lower the opacity more and more, and at some point I just took it off completely. Yeah, that's kind of how I worked with that. As for other things that I found challenging and like my solutions to them, I'd say another huge challenge was just my general inexperience with things, and that's what I both love and hate about creating like a full-on original illustration, is that you're forced to see what you still have to improve on. And for me, it's definitely backgrounds. I really like hit some walls in creating this painting, and one of them was trying to figure out what I should do with the background. And my solution to that was basically just doing like the little bokeh effect. Is it bokeh? I think the little circles, the little pretty light circles in the back. That's kind of what I did. Usually if I don't know what to do with a background, and most of the time I don't, I just go with like a design type element. So that's why I did that. Another thing is composition. I know I said earlier that I use the thumbnails to try and help figure out what composition I want, but with the branches, I felt like I was struggling trying to figure out how to work with that. And that's another thing. My experience in both drawing branches and flowers is not very high. I'm very used to drawing like characters and stuff, as opposed to like the elements that I want to incorporate in these pieces. So yeah, all of this is just like, you know, things that kind of come naturally over time. So yeah, it's just my inexperience working with these things, which is usually solved through practicing, of course. Always practice. Always, like, that's what I want to like work in my sketchbook more with, is like practicing the things that I don't know about. And so practicing, experimenting, and if you're like me and you want to work on a piece, or you have an idea of something you want to work on, but you don't know how to execute it, and you don't have the time to always like build up your skills on practicing, I would say references, definitely. Like, always use references. I used many references on Pinterest trying to like look up like this flower, because I don't know if I said it before, but basically this flower that I'm drawing, it looks very similar to like a cherry blossom, but it's like a flowering kint, I believe it's called. And these are flowers that only, or not only, but they tend to also bloom in the winter, which I thought was like really cool, and like that was the aspect that I wanted to bring into this drawing, because it's called Winter Blossom. So that's why I chose those, and so I looked at them and tried to get a feel for how they looked. I don't know how well I replicated it, but I did take a shot at it, so I did take a stab at it. This is very violent. I did put an effort to try and incorporate those flowers into it. So right now what you're seeing is like the screen recording of while I'm working in Procreate, as opposed to like just the time lapse where you're kind of like you're seeing stuff happen, but you're not exactly seeing like how they're happening. This is like the rendering process that I wanted to share, and as I mentioned before via like captions, I had recorded whenever I was rendering like the face and things like that earlier, because I felt like that was also something cool to watch, but I don't know, it got lost or something, and I'm sad. But anyways, so to talk about my rendering process, first off, the most things that I render is like the character, and then like the flowers. Like, I try to render anything that I can. Anything that's gonna like serve some kind of like detail, I guess, everything's rendered a lot more than the background. Like, the bigger the elements are, the more that they're going to be rendered, if that makes sense. So I render the subject the most, and then like the details come a little bit second. But anyways, the rendering process is like a lot of layers. That's whenever, because that's whenever I'm adding like the shadows and the lighting and stuff, all those special effects. So that's whenever I bust out the layers. I know there's a lot of people where they either, it's like you either use a ton of layers or you just do everything on one layer, and either one is kind of insane. There's definitely like extremes to both sides of the spectrum, and I feel like I'm on that side where I just use way too many layers. Just like everything, there's like a good and a bad to doing that, and the reason why I do it is because, like, I don't know about you guys, if you ever learned like Photoshop, or if you were ever like taking a class on Photoshop or were introduced to it, there's a thing called like working in a destructive environment and a non-destructive environment, and that probably encouraged me or enabled me to like use multiple layers to avoid like destroying whichever main layer that I liked. So if I shade something one way and I really like that way, but I want to like push it a little bit further, I'm going to duplicate that layer and then just experiment with the other layer that I created, if that makes sense. It's actually one of the biggest pros of like doing art digitally, is because you can experiment with so many different things, and I feel like being able to use multiple layers that way and test things out, and if it doesn't work I could just delete it and always have that original layer. Why is my voice cracking so much today? I'm offended. But yeah, so that's why I like doing that. And on the other hand, it's not necessarily the best habit to get into, because art isn't always that way, especially if you do art traditionally. It's like you can't undo something if you mess up, so you can also like overload the file with like too much data, if that makes sense. Like, I'm pretty sure it's like it creates a bigger file when you have all these layers, and that also makes it like harder to work in. It might make your program more likely to crash, so you kind of have to be careful. Plus, I think on Procreate, there's a limit to how many layers you can use, and that changes depending on how big what your drawing is, because I know the bigger the drawing, the less layers you get to work with. So yeah, on terms of like my rendering skills or like technique, I really can't tell you anything there. It's not like I fully know what I'm doing. I'm kind of just trying to like makeshift what I think like shadows and light do. So usually I'll have like a layer for like the shading, and then I'll have like a layer for like the lighting of it, but I don't fully know how that works. I'm still trying to figure that out myself. So yeah, but as for like how I felt working on it versus after, like after I finished it, I feel like when I was working on it, at first it felt nice. Like when I came up with like the thumbnails and everything and like the sketch part, that's usually the part of the process that I enjoy, because it's like, it's very non-committal and like carefree, and it's like, yeah, okay, I'm just gonna draw and create like this nice cute little, you know, thing. And then like once I get past the sketching phase and I dive into like the actual part of the drawing where you have to commit, because it's like you're putting in like the flats and then you start rendering, I get terrified. Like, I just become so overwhelmed, and this always happens because it takes a lot for me to like work on a piece, and I'm trying to get better at that because I really want to create more like original pieces that I've worked on thoroughly. It doesn't even have to be original, like even like a fan art, if I just put like a lot of time in it where I spend more than just like a day or two just working on it, you know, I'm afraid of putting that kind of commitment into pieces, so I always run away. So there always comes a point where after like the nice sketching phase and coming up with ideas and things like that, when I have to actually work on it, I get extremely overwhelmed, and it also causes me to procrastinate and put it off, you know, because I'd rather just work on fun little sketches or like concepts and things like that, where it's non-committal and I'm just playing around, as opposed to working through something and really like kneading out all like the knots and trying to like problem solve and fix things. If that really shows you how I feel in the process. But afterwards, there's really like this sense of relief, because it's like I finished it, so I'm like, wow, you know what? Maybe it wasn't as terrible as I thought, because I was able to do this and it's not that scary, and it means that I can do this again because I already have experience from working on this. So the next time I do it, it's not going to be as terrifying. So yeah, let me know if you're like me on that, or if you're kind of just like, yeah man, whatever, I'll just dive in this piece, no big deal. But yeah, that's kind of how I feel when working on this. Since we're getting a little bit more towards the end, just to talk about like what I feel like I did well versus like what I feel like I need to improve on, I would definitely say like A for effort. This part is always hard for me because I'm not the best at complimenting myself. I am as humble as can be. I don't really like to be like, yeah, I know what I'm doing. Because I don't. I totally recognize that I'm someone that has a lot to learn about art, but I don't really find it too discouraging because it just means that there's so much more growth that is available to me. But yeah, I'd say A for effort. I definitely, like, just for trying this new style out of not using line art, I definitely think that that was a step towards something great, because it already has me thinking like, maybe I should try out doing more like studies where I just paint instead of trying to do like the line art and then painting, you know, just starting with painting shapes and stuff. So yeah. And then another thing, I'd say it's pretty creative and magical, so I also really like that aspect because that's something that I really like to keep in mind when it comes to my work, and kind of just resonates with who I am. So as for things that I feel like I could improve on, definitely backgrounds. I'm really hurt that I just had to end up going with like a really simple background, because I feel like that really makes it feel empty, and I wanted to try and add something else, but I just really wasn't sure what would work. So and then another thing would be the composition, or trying to figure that out, because I know I wanted like to have like these little snowflakes and flower petals at the same time, but I wasn't entirely sure how to make that work. And a lot of the times I was going back and forth trying to figure out what the best balance was. So just trying to work with like the composition and really like trying to find a good balance between the amount of like flower petals and like snowflakes that were in there. I didn't want it to seem overwhelming, but I still wanted it to seem like you were immersed in this sort of world or you were immersed in this scene that this character's in. So yeah, I feel like, yeah, those two, the backgrounds and figuring out like balance and composition in a illustration, I feel like I could work on that more. Of course there's other things that I feel like I could work on, but those two are probably the top. So yeah, I'm trying to think if I covered any like little things, like little side stories or like backstories to give on anything else. I know I changed the eyes early at the beginning from closed to open because I was thinking about how the viewer would interact, and I wanted it to sort of seem more interesting. Having the eyes closed wouldn't have necessarily been bad, but I wanted them to like look at this character who's like almost looking up in a way, almost. And it also gave me the opportunity to like really exaggerate and like play with like different, I don't know, magical things in this person's eye. I may have been inspired by Gojo's eyes if you've been watching Jujutsu Kaisen. Oh my god. And another change I made, or one of the thumbnails that I decided to go with, it looked the same as this, but it had a red scarf instead of blue. But I decided to go with like the blue because I wanted the aspect of this drawing. I don't know if you saw at the beginning, but I wanted the color palette to have like blue, pink, and white mostly. So that's why I did that. As for how long this took, it took about 23 hours. So almost like a day's worth. Like if I spent the entire day literally just drawing this, that's what it would have been like. Of course, it took me like literal weeks to finally finish it, so... But yeah, 23 hours was the track time in Procreate. And will this be an art print? I would hope so. I don't know. Let me know if you would be interested in having this somewhere in your wall or things like that. But as for everything else, that's all I have to say. So, thank you so much for watching until the end, and if you have any questions or anything, comment them below and I can try to answer them. If you enjoyed watching this video, please feel free to like it and subscribe to see more of my content. For reference, I'm Rhea, or Etheria, and I very much enjoy posting art or art-related content on my channel. I try to post weekly, but if you would like to see more timely updates, I encourage you to follow my other social media that's linked in the description. Till next time, again, thank you so much for watching, and I wish you a nice rest of your day or